times in your life when you work with someone, and there are times in your life when there's someone who's just extraordinary at what they do. Tonight we have just that kind of guest. In my career, I had the chance to work with someone who was just above and beyond anything we could have imagined. The FBI. Think of an undercover operation that you've seen on television or the movies. Think of the undercover agents sitting in a restaurant, living it up with the bad guys, spending a lot of government money on good food, good wine, having a great time. And then think of the agents sitting out in the car, running the engine because it's cold, eating a 7-Eleven hot dog, and listening to The Wire while the undercover has their time where they're freezing. I was that agent. Tonight, we're going to talk to the undercover agent. But there's a catch here. Because while we were sitting out in the car eating our cold hot dogs and he was living it up, the fact of the matter is if we did something wrong, we got discovered, we made one bad move, it was the life of the undercover agent that was on the line. Quite a trade-off. Tonight, we're going to meet with the FBI's most successful undercover agent, at least in my opinion, from everything he's done. He was an incredible person to work with. Please welcome Jack Garcia. Jack, welcome.
Michael, great seeing you, Michael. Thank you very much for having me.
Oh, this is terrific, buddy. It's great to be back with some old friends. You and I really had some good times together, and we'll talk about that as we go on.
We certainly did. We certainly
did, man. We were rocking and rolling. As I tell people, that was a time Colombian cocaine during the times of Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartel coming into New York City. It didn't get much better than that, did it?
All right. And in the Lions Den in Union, it was here we are in Jackson Heights, Queens. You know, that was Little Cali, as it was referred to. We were right there during the height of the drug crisis in America.
Yeah, you're right. We're the epicenter. So, Jack, let's talk about undercover first. Because, you talk to a young agent or you talk to somebody who wants to come into the FBI. You ask them, what would you like to do? I hear two things. Either they want to be a profiler or they want to be an undercover agent. Mostly based on what they see on television. But undercover work is not for everybody. First of all, what attracted you to undercover work when you started?
You hit the nail on the head. That's true. They watch Silence of the Lambs. They all want to be they want to be in the behavioral science unit. They watch Donnie Brasco, and it's right away undercover work. And all these TV shows that glorify the undercover life. Actually, what really got me into working undercover was my senior year in college. I went to see the movie Serpico, and that was with Al Pacino. And Al Pacino, of course, the coolest guy we all know, and he did an outstanding job there. He grew his hair, a beard, and he went undercover to go against corruption as well as drug and the mob. So I immediately set my sights on going into law enforcement, and I figured the best thing to do is go to the best agency in the world, the FBI. So I made an application, and then when I went through the process of applying, which took me some time, inasmuch I wasn't even an American citizen at the time, I finally got in the FBI after I became a citizen, and then I forgot about working undercover. I wanted to be Efren Zimbalist Jr., the wingtip shoes, Thousand Eye shoes, and the three-piece vest, and working bank robberies, and of course, the demographics of the FBI was really unusual back in the 80s. They had a lot of people that looked like FBI agents, and because I didn't in the early 80s, I spoke Spanish fluently, and we started working dope back at that era with DEA. Next thing you know, I started working undercover because I didn't look like your stereotypical FBI agent.
No, and I'm going to expound upon that a little more. About you when we go down the road here. But so Jack, when you started working, did you start out making cameo appearances without training, or did you go right into this sort of deep undercover school?
Well, there wasn't a training school when I got in. I got into the FBI in 1980. There had been a class that was once held that it had a lot of the old-time undercover, but it was a one-shot class, and sooner, within probably after that was completed, they never had an FBI undercover program per se. And what had happened, the FBI director at the time, which was William Webster, was on Capitol Hill right after the Abscan case and the Greystoke case, which was done in Chicago against judges. And he said that all of his undercover agents received training. Well, that was kind of inaccurate. So they brought a lot of guys from the field into the FBI. And at that time, I had long hair down my back. I had an earring. I had a goatee, and they brought in all these guys that looked totally different, and they kind of buried us in Quantico. And after like 2 days, after getting all these stares and people kind of looking at it strangely, they decided to move us to a hotel. And there was kind of getting together, networking, and coming up with scenarios. And the network was really important. So from there, it developed into the FBI. In order to work undercover, you need to be certified. I went from a student down the line to I was one of the instructors, and you learned a lot. In fact, the FBI Undercover School is one of the premier schools in the world where a lot of foreign undercover agents come to kind of learn techniques that we use in the FBI.
I just want to clarify something for the audience, Jack. You talked about Greystone, public corruption case with judges. About 10 years ago when I was SAC, I was giving a speech on public corruption to a bunch of young, mentioned Abscam. And I get this bunch of blank faces in the room. And I realized that no one even heard of Abscam. There was such a young bunch. So I'm thinking our audience may not know, but Abscam was sort of I think, the seminal case of public corruption where FBI undercover agents bribed U.S. congressmen and senators, basically, right? And
That,
we,
yeah.
right, and we actually had videos, at least of one congressman stuffing his jacket with cash, right? That famous film.
Exactly. And I think there was a movie with Leonardo DiCaprio that just came out not too long ago that was supposed to be resemblance of the Abscan case, where the informant was portrayed. I forgot the name of what it was. And Greystoke, I think it was either Greystone or Greystoke, was where they went in and they got all these dirty judges in Chicago. So you're right. The same thing with me. Sometimes when I mention even Serpico, I get these blank stares. No one knows or seen that movie. So that tells us, Michael, we're getting old. You know?
I don't need any reminders about that. All right. So, Jack, tell us about undercover training. In other words, what qualities did you see to those individuals, or at least the ones that you know were successful in their undercover careers? Sort of, the intangibles in someone's personality.
Well, a lot of people think that you can be trained and go to the in-service in the FBI and become an undercover as you would somebody who is maybe studying how to be a polygrapher, a polygrapher. No, it doesn't. This is something that you're born with. It's this ability to blend and to be around people that you really have nothing in common with, but being comfortable. It's kind of like you're an actor, like a chameleon. So it's something you're kind of born with. And I think what the FBI Academy does, especially the undercover school, is we weed out those individuals who really have no business being there because they're not thinking quickly on their feet. And they could wind up not only getting themselves hurt, but maybe getting the backup guys to watch how we operate. So it really is a kind of a weeding out process, and it's something that you're born with. You really can't learn this. I mean, as you know, Michael, for the years that you had in the FBI, there are some great guys in the FBI that are great case agents. There are other guys who are great helpers. Some guys are great on surveillance. So I found that little niche that I felt comfortable. Now, I don't know whether that had to do with my upbringing in the Bronx, New York, or because my personality trait, but it started off where I try to hone in my skills and I would learn on the job experience because at that time, there was really nobody that you could turn to because we didn't have a kind of a program that was available. So I learned a lot on the streets. And of course, I received a lot of valuable input and counseling from the case agents, guys like you and other guys who would teach you like, hey, this is the way the subject operates. This is what we know about the individual. This is the way I think you should approach them. Don't come on too strong. Don't come. So those are more, trade craft secrets that we learn as an undercover to apply on certain jobs that you operate.
All right, Jack, and you made some great points there. We all have a skill set, and someone may or may not be good at undercover. Doesn't mean they're not a good agent at something else. Good undercover agent may not be good at something they can do. But there's other things that have to fit in. You and I talked about sometimes when we try to use agents who grew up in a different part of the country to come and try to act like a New York City person, and it just didn't go. They were seen through right away. There was something about them. It just didn't blend. But when we talk about the intangibles, I'll tell this to the audience. What I remember about you, Jack, and a couple of the other guys on the squad, we had this very big squad, 30, guys, a few girls, NYPD, FBI agents, and just hanging around the office sometimes, or even going out to a bar, nothing undercover. You had this incredible ability to have people just want to hang around you. You were always holding court, as I remember. You just had this, this magnetic personality, just naturally. And everyone just kind of wanted to hang out and talk to you, and you're always laughing and having a good time. And I think that intangible is what made you so good. You were just able to get in like just like a chameleon, and just kind of connect with anybody. You think that was
Well, those are
your
some of the
success?
skill sets that you mentioned. That is true. With me, since I am such a big guy, they expect some kind of like a Luca Brasi kind of guy, some guy who's probably me. And I'm very outgoing, very personable, and try to get everybody involved. And I think that's kind of my little skill set that I worked in my interests. And I always believe, and one of the things I teach on the covers is always when you're on the cover, try to be like yourself. Don't go in there like you're a badass, because if you become a badass, you're going to wind up, you eventually got to come down. You could always kick it up, but you can't kick it down, because we make our first impressions to be the most lasting impressions. So if I go in there like this bull in a china shop, of course, it's going to be hard for me to come down. But if I go slow and then I get aggravated or anger, it's more of the way it should be. So one of the things that I learned in early on was to just be yourself and go with that. And also, and like I mentioned before, an undercover needs to be outgoing, personable, and in order to bring the individual in, because that's the objective. You want to make disarm this individual for him or her not to think that you are who an FBI agent or a police officer.
Right, right. And you did that very well. So, Jack, let's fast forward at least to the years when I worked with you, several years again on that squad, FBI, NYPD, Drug Task Force, Colombian cocaine, Medellin cartel, New York City. We were running and gunning. We were doing it. You were the undercover agent of choice for everybody. And the Colombians used to work with mostly just Colombians. You're not a Colombian, are you, Jack?
No, I was born in Cuba, so my accent is Cuban, correct?
But we passed you off as Colombian many times, did we not?
Yeah, we did, but sometimes it was a little tough. So I went with Colombian, and if you recall, I would bring another agent who was Colombian descent, Diego Rodriguez. And Diego was, since he didn't have type of my personality, although he was a good undercover, I would be his brother-in-law, and I would just say, look, you just sit there and talk and be yourself, but let me run the show, and I'll tell them that I am your buffer. So I'm the guy running the operation. And that's kind of how we worked it as a team together. And I think you're also underselling our squad, Michael. We had the premier drug squad in all of the U.S. I mean, if you look at our statistics and if you look at the NYPD cooperation that worked with us as well as the agents, there was no better, I would say, drug squad in all of America. I mean, we had multiple undercover operations, wiretaps that we were working. It was day in and day out seizures of dope, of money. And it was really a lot of fun. And like you said, running and gunning, that really, it kind of blows my mind that the Bureau is no longer involved in working narcotics, because it's not like the drug world has stopped. It's still out there, but we have other investigative priorities now.
You make a thing. We were C-13. That was our moniker, and that's the moniker I use in my book, which is a novel about the years you and I spent together working narcotics. But I remember, Jack, after I left New York, I went up that management path for whatever reason. But when I got to headquarters, and especially when I got to my first office as a field supervisor, I was running a drug squad. I remember a couple of senior agents who were older than me kind of wanted to sit down and tell me how things are done, out in New Mexico. And I said, guys, I worked on New York C-13. There was silence in the room. That squad was well known. They knew they weren't going to tell me, how to work a drug case. There's nothing, I hadn't done already. So, Jack, I remember sometimes you used to tell me about how you try to adapt. And I remember once when we introduced you in an undercover role, and you won't remember the specifics, but I remember the conversation you and I having, where the informant left for a minute, either go to the bathroom or answer a call, and you were left with the guy that you was going to take $1 million from to launder his money. And I remember you saying to me, we sat there for 20 minutes and didn't say a word. Does that sound like a scenario, any scenario you remember from the past, and why it was
Well,
like that?
I had to, I was very fortunate to have worked with you. I've always enjoyed working with you when you were the case agent. And, some of these cases all blend together, as you know, since we've worked with a lot of these guys out there, not only in picking up money, large quantities of money, but also of heroin and cocaine. And I know many a times that, for instance, just to kind of change the topic on that, when one particular case that you were involved in, where the two Montoya brothers who were involved in heroin trafficking, and they were really flooding the New York and the Northeast with heroin, high quality heroin, because at that time the Colombians were growing the heroin, which was better than the Chinese and better than the Afghanistan and Pakistani heroin. So they actually cut the market down. And there was so many different police departments and every alphabet agency, ATF, DEA, CIA, you name it, they were out there working, INS. And sometimes it would just blend together. We'd run into these guys. But I remember these two guys that you set forward to work on the wiretap, setting up on their cell phones, which, by the way, a wiretap is probably one of the most difficult things to set up in the Bureau because of all the checks and balances and work that you have to do. And you were like steadfast trying to complete this. And we had a meeting with DEA and said to them, look, we're working with these guys. We have hand to hand with these guys. And they assured us, okay, you work with the guy. Well, sure enough, that same night, I think you called me and told me, hey, the Montoya brothers were arrested by DEA.
Yes.
So all of that work that we had and all of those steps that we moved forward they're in the wind because now they became property of DEA. So one of the things that working all this narcotics and all the stuff that we did was very tough because there was so many people, and there still are so many people working narcotics in New York, and we would run into them, and that's an unfortunate thing. So that's why we would try to work bigger and better subjects, and I think that's why we were successful. But in the meantime, we always were vigilant, not only of the bad guy maybe showing up on the set, and maybe some of his crew, but also the good guys could be on the set. So working dope was kind of a rough situation. If you recall one particular case too, when they went to a meeting down at headquarters, and there was my phone number that was listed as one of the major Cali cartel guys who were in New York. And I think it was Charlie Cunningham who said, wait a minute, I know that guy. That's Jack Garcia. What are you talking? So it was always that game of cat and mouse that we were playing. And so that's what made it, I think, even more interesting. Like when we went out there to hit something and go out and get a bad guy, we also, in the meantime, back of our head, looking out for the good guy being on the set.
Right. But, there were 2 points I was thinking about when we were talking. One is we talked about, the undercover agent having to fit the part. And I remember one time, we had for a short time a customs agent on our task force. And he called me after he left several months later. And he said, we have an undercover going out to meet someone. And he described the conversation they had. And he said, Michael, that sounds like an FBI guy trying to do undercover work. And I ran the name. There was one of the guys from a white-collar crime, from some southern state, tried to come off like a big-time New York money launderer. And he was just so obvious. They knew right away it was an FBI agent. So luckily we were able to can that. But what I was getting at with you being silent with that guy, I wasn't expecting to remember the case. What I was getting at is you're talking about adapting to the situation. So as friendly as you are, you're outgoing, at the time there's a time to hold and a time to fold. So you sense that this drug dealer, money launderer, was not the kind of guy you want to buddy around with. He would not have been open to that. And had you, done what you normally do, which is befriend somebody, you might have blown the case. So that's what I'm talking about, your adaptability, and you have to be able to read the signals and read the handwriting on the wall.
Well, you're right. And every subject is different. There are the guys that were kidding around. There were guys who were hinked up. There were guys who also tried to push the envelope a little, and you had to put them in their place. So each case was different. I mean, this guy, if I would come on too nice, they may not like that. So I would respect and give them their room, and then I spanked them when they needed a spanking. And I think that's the way it was. But you had to assess each one, and how we do that as FBI agents, we rely a lot on the intelligence of the informant as well as the case agents, guys like you who did their homework to say, hey, this is the kind of guy that he is. You should maybe do it's kind of like a personality assessment. So you don't go in there and really blow it off because you're a big mouth. You go in there and you kind of adapt to what that person would like. Because, keep in mind, we're wearing a recorder through all of this. And we wore the recorder because of the fact that it's indefensible hearing the bad guy own word that would make him flip down the line. That he's admitting that he's a drug trafficker, he's admitting he's going to do this deal with you as opposed to not having a recorder. So you're wearing this small recorder that in the top of your mind you think it's visible. You think it's this giant boombox that's on you. But so when you're going on there, you have to assume that this individual is saying, who is this guy? Where did he come from? What's he all about? Is he out to get me? Is he an agent? Or is he a bad guy who's trying to rip me off? Now, the thing about it with my size and the way I look, it was kind of like a double-edged sword. Yes, they didn't think of me of being an agent because I don't look like an FBI agent, especially then with the goatee and the hair and the body and the whole bit.
Well, Jeff, let me just jump in for a second. Let's tell the audience, go back to that time. How tall are you?
I'm 6'4".
And how much did you weigh at that time?
I was about 350 pounds, give or take 20 or 30.
At any given moment, whatever we were doing.
And I had the long hair. Remember, I had the long hair and the goatee and the earring, and I just didn't look nor acted because what it is I learned from the informants. Guys like you who had good informants. You would then hear their stories, and their stories became my stories. The way they acted is became the way I acted. So I learned the way to behave on the streets, the way to say the right words and the description of dope and how to handle myself out there. So, when you're out there in the world, you may be, they won't believe that I was an agent because of the way I look, but I didn't want them to be convinced that I was what they call a sapo, or they call that a rat. Right. Because if they thought I was a rat, we all know the consequence.
Right. And also, I imagine you don't want to box yourself in a corner where you have to prove yourself and they call you bluff. Because no matter what, you're still an FBI agent, and we had rules of conduct.
Oh, absolutely. And that's another thing that Hollywood always prays, that you see the guy using cocaine. We don't do that. We have to play by the same rules as of everyone else. And the whole point of it all is that a lot of the guys that I dealt with over my years of working dope, not too many guys were users. These guys are kind of businessmen. They're here to make money and lots of it. So they don't go out and inhale the retail. They don't go out and use the dope like you see it on TV. That's more of the low-level guys, the guys that the PD handles on the street. Those are the guys that filters down. But when you're dealing with these major cartel guys, you're dealing with significant businessmen, and that's how they approach it.
Right. There's a lot of questions coming in. I'm going to get to them in a second. So first, I want to ask you a question before we go to the questions.
Right.
Thinking about, because I want to cover a lot of more of your career than just the time you and I were together. Working in narcotics, is there a certain constant that you could describe, saying, whenever I went into this meeting with one of these potential drug dealers or money launderers, I always had to remember X? Or did you just always have to play it by ear? Any constants in that?
No, after a while it became automatic because we did so much of it, Michael, at work. But at first, you had to remember a kilo has 1,000 grams, what the current price is, because cocaine is, fluctuated. Right. We were buying kilos at one time at 12 to 15,000 a kilo. That was maybe 90% proof, but we've also seen it as high as 35, 37. So it's kind of like the stock market. So you had to be aware of what was going, and you had to be aware how to go about negotiating with these guys. And also when you did money laundering as well, because, and also keep in mind, sometimes because of the high level guys that we dealt with, a lot of these informants, which we all know operate for many reasons, informants either they love America or they're looking in for money, or they're working off a beef, or they're looking to betray someone. So we keep it in mind that my actions out in the street not only affect my life, but also the informant who is responsible for getting me there. So we had to go through this whole process when you guys decide to take down the case. You had to take them in consideration because once they know that I am not who I claim to be, then it's going to be a reflection to them. And as you know, every time we locked up a lot of these guys, and some what we call Dixie cups because they were disposable. Some of these guys, after they get locked up, what do? A high profile cartel lawyer comes in, and all they want to look at to see how did this guy get busted? Because they're looking to find who the rat is inside the organization. So we had to walk that balance with these cases, not only worrying about our lives, but as far as my life out there, I was always comfortable with guys like you out there. I know you look out for me. I know when I went into a location, maybe there was nobody in the place, but I knew you guys knew there came a certain time that if I didn't come out, you guys would be coming in. So I would always, as you know, try to set up a meeting where it would be in a public place. And, bad guys also don't trust other bad guys because in that world, there's also what they call a tumbe, which is a rip. So a lot of these guys also get ripped. So it's foreseeable to say, hey, listen, you want to do a transaction, that's fine. But I'm not going into the basement of that house. I says, I'll do it with you at a diner, I'll do it with you at a parking lot, because I don't know you. And that in itself, and if they push it, then you start thinking in the back of your mind, like, well, maybe they are trying to set me up for a rip. So it's one of those delicate balances with these bad guys that there is no honor among thieves.
Well, Jack, remember a case we talked about where I was doing surveillance again for you out on Queens Boulevard. You were in a meeting in a building there, and we spotted a car that was suspicious. We had the cops clear the place out and stop the car before we let you leave that undercover operation. And what did we find out? Do you remember that?
Oh, that was one of the funniest times ever because I'm meeting this guy. I want to get off the set. I'm calling you, and all I see is police activity. And I'm going, what the heck happened here? And it turned out that the guys who had the vantage point, you guys had the vantage point of where I was at, happened to be in a bar restaurant. And what happened is at that moment, somebody came in to rob the joint. And here were these FBI agents and cops on duty. And sure enough, that wound up in an arrest and a chase. But I don't know what's going on because I'm too busy with the bad guy and I'm looking for my team to get out. And it was kind of comical. It was kind of like a comedy of errors in that particular. But the good thing is everybody went home and the bad guys who tried to rob the place went to jail. So that was a good thing.
Right, but I always laughed before I get these questions. Is what I always remember you saying is the guy you were meeting with sat down. Today, there's a couple of idiots next door who just try to rob a bar with a bunch of cops there, not knowing he's talking to an undercover FBI agent. I always thought the irony of that was something.
Well, you're right, and he knew. Right, he knew that. I didn't know that though. He knew it. That was even funnier. Like, how do you know that? And I'm going, So it's always something goes on in the undercover world. It's really amazing,
All right, let's get to some of the questions, and then I want to move to your days with working with the mob. All right,
sure.
All right. Someone wants to know, how do you get chosen for undercover? Do you just apply, or are you chosen? I think Jack, you've already said you kind of apply for it, but you must be selected as well qualified. Is that correct?
Right. You have to go through the process of school and you have to graduate, and they call it certified. Now, to get into that school, which is it costs a lot for each individual office, is they have to see you as somebody who is capable of doing undercover work. So they're not just going to send somebody on a whim to just say, hey, I want to be an undercover work. You probably at that time would have to have done some kind of cameo, which are like a small, like maybe drive somebody to a location and undercover, or maybe just show up and watch. And you have that interest. But the undercover school is what sets them all apart. And that's when you graduate, is that you know that you're ready to go solo by being an undercover agent.
I never got past the cameo appearance part, Jack. And I remember this one informant I was working when you and I were together in Queens told me, he says, I will never introduce you. You just look like a cop no matter what you do.
Well, and you see, but there's nothing wrong with that. We need guys who, most of being out there, not everybody can do undercover, just like I know I can never do what you did. So here you are, you're able to write affidavits for wiretaps or search warrants, to coordinate meetings with United States attorneys, to be in office, to be an SAC, to be. I can't do that. I'm just that's my little niche and my little happiness, and I'm kind of glad I have it. Just like I'm glad there are agents who are great surveillance guys. I'm also guys who are maybe great pilots or whatever their case is. We all have to find the niche. What scares me are those people who think they could do something and can't. And that's the same thing with undercover. I was asked many times to work undercover, and I have over 100 cases, under my belt. Not only working as in dope, but I've done murder for hires, Russian organized crime, Asian mob cases. But there are cases that I wouldn't work or I cannot work. Like I've been asked to do white collar crime cases. I don't have that type of ability to do that. I've been asked to work porn cases, child porn. I can't do that. So you have to recognize among yourself to say, this is what I can do and cannot do. I think you run into problems with guys who think that they could do everything. Because if you think you could do everything, you're going to get hurt. And that's one of the other things I get asked a lot is, are you scared? Of course I'm scared. It's the guy lies to you. Someone will be lying if they said they weren't scared with these guys. These guys are sociopaths, they're killers, they're drug dealers, they're murderers, et cetera, et cetera. The key thing is for them not to see your fear, is you have to mask it. You have to be in there fully concentrated, not let them know you were afraid, but at the same token, be prepared of anything that goes down. And I think that's when you get a guy that says, oh, no, I wasn't afraid of being around Hells Angels. Yeah, you're afraid. Being around dope, you got to be afraid. If not, you have no business in this job.
Right, and we talked about that when we were agents on the street. The guys were just a little too bravado for their own good. They made us nervous.
Exactly.
Right. Someone asked, how much backup does an undercover agent get? Are you ever just by yourself? I'll take the first one to say it depends on the situation. Requires a lot of agents. We used to have at least 6 or 7 guys just on you. One of those meetings where we weren't making an arrest, just where you're having dinner or having a get together. It took a lot of manpower for safety, not to get burnt, a whole bunch of tactical reasons. But Jack, did you ever go into an undercover operation without backup?
Early on in my career, I did, because that was the kind of way they did things back then. And we've morphed ourselves in the undercover program of now having guys out there. But in the old days, if you work these long-term cases like I worked that took 3 years, you were kind of on your own, and you would have contact agent to meet. And it wasn't really, think about the manpower that would be required if you're meeting with your subjects every day. Now, that has now changed. That, of course, we have backup, but by backup, they mean more like a team, just making sure you're going into a location and you're coming out, because that's all really they can do. Because in reality, Michael, if I go into a restaurant and it's off hours and I'm meeting with the bad guy, he finds my recorder and he puts 2 in the back of my head, or they go beat me up. You may be outside, but you don't know what's going on inside. And then the only thing would be is if you see everybody go out and you don't see me going out, then you start maybe worrying. But what would be the job of somebody watching you? Somebody would be coming in and just putting the police tape around, because there would be a crime scene. So, but my preference was always to have guys like you around, because not only do we have a friendship, we worried about each other. You weren't just like, cover that undercover, he's going to be meeting with these mobsters. No, let's cover Jack. He's my friend. I'm worried about the guy. Maybe you, and what you guys would do sometimes, if I was like you said at the beginning of the show, when you're eating your hot dogs and I'm eating my filet mignon, you guys will call up and say, hey, listen, what's going on? And I would pose that you're my wife or my girlfriend. And I say, hey, baby, listen, I may be a little while, I'll see you. And in essence, you guys were saying, hurry up, man, this is getting old, So we play tricks amongst one another.
Right. Yeah, okay. Here's a good question. How are you trained to deal with cultural differences, and you not even bother trying to put someone in that doesn't match? I think clearly if someone does not match a certain gang, or you can't put someone different, in the mob. But why don't you answer that, Jack? How do we deal with cultural differences, and do we try to match when it doesn't work?
That's a very good question. As far as that's why I said to you earlier, you only take on the jobs that you know that you can do comfortably. one that I did for cultural differences. I'm Cuban. I was born eating rice and beans and ropa vieja and all the food Cuban. Then all of a sudden I had to pose as an Italian. So I had to convince them that I was a third generation Italian from Miami and I was into that whole culture. So I didn't feel comfortable, but the agent who was the case agent, whose name was Nat Parisi, he was an Italian. And he taught me everything so that he gave me the confidence to say, look, you're ready. You could do this. I think you could do it. And when we went in, we at first thought, like, okay, they're not going to believe it. So we'll have a backup scenario where your father is Italian, but your mother is Cuban. So you're a Cuban. But they bought the whole thing. So as far as cultural differences, it really is tough to play that. And you should always play an undercover role that you are comfortable in doing, not only in the violation, but also among the people that you're at, because you can't sustain it. If you're meeting these people so many times, you're going to make that slip, and that slip may cost you your life.
And I remember you telling, I don't remember where you and I were speaking, but you talked about your days undercover the mob, how certain foods are pronounced, how they would pronounce it, and how someone like I would pronounce it. There's a difference.
Well, the same thing as I would pronounce it, like, manigot instead of manicati,
right.
brojol, not bracioli, and stuff like that. When I told them that I was that third generation Italian, I had to have grown up to have heard those foods, even though my role was that I grew up around a lot of Cubans in Miami, which, as you know, they are, but I was an Italian. So if you don't know how to pronounce your basic Italian stuff like Nutella and Parmesan Reggiano and mozzarella and all that, and you're saying mozzarella and all that, they're going to look at you. What the hell is this guy? And the key thing of working undercover and whatever role that you're playing, whether you're playing a Wall Street broker, a guy posing as an Italian, a guy who is an expert in weapons, know your subject matter. Because if you don't know your subject matter, you don't want to raise any suspicions or any eyebrows on this guy. You want everything to go smooth. Once somebody gets a wink like, hey, this guy doesn't know how to say mortadella? What the hell is this guy supposed to be Italian? And you start getting those little doubts, which in that world, the criminal world, it's full of paranoia. And if you're getting that paranoia and they start doubting you, then that could open up. That's why I was always felt, in my opinion, that when I wore a wire, I didn't want anybody to pat me down. And luckily that never happened. And the reason for that is if they pat me down, and let's say they didn't find anything, okay? Does that mean that whole doubt is going to be eliminated, that he's going to trust you? No, he patted you down for a reason. He doesn't trust you. And if he finds nothing, he still doesn't trust you. So that's the key thing, is you don't want to build those doubts in any of these bad guys.
You just reminded me, talking about cultural things, before I left New York, I remember another squad tapped me to do, again, a small undercover role. Israelis doing money laundering. And
right.
We broke into that. And so they were looking for a New York Jewish guy. All right. So There I was. And I remember in my conversations with the Israelis, I was, again, introduced by an informant. It wasn't so much that they were testing me, but I remember certain things coming up that someone who had not grown up in New York in a Jewish family would not have known what they were talking about. Just, little words, little phrases, things about the Sabbath. Just someone else wouldn't know that. I remember thinking, this is why we really got to be careful about trying to put someone in with no match, because it would have been obvious, very quickly.
That's true. And there you go. That's exactly how I feel thing. And that's why when I played the role sometimes as a Colombian, I was very limited in that and depended on who I did it with, because somebody could pick that up. And, among the us Hispanics, you have the mannerism of speaking and little dialects that they could catch you if you're making it up. So you're right. And that's why I said earlier, stay to your script. The way you are is what you bring with you as undercover. Don't go away from that, because you're going to slip up, or you're going to revert back to who you are.
Very good. All right. Question you kind of talked about, Jack. What does the FBI do undercover work for now? Is it only terrorism and not drugs? You and I have been out for a little while, but what's your take on our undercover ops these days?
Well, undercover ops are now more difficult with the advent of the internet. I mean, I remember back in the 90s, Michael, with you were the computer expert in the squad. I remember we had an undercover case and we went to you to set us up with you. You were the IT guy for us. because nobody comprehended that. So we could create all these false legends, as we call them, or backstopping as to who we are, our identities. Now, it's virtually impossible. If I meet a bad guy and I'll say, "Hey, Michael, really, your name is Michael Smith?" So, where did you go to high school, Michael? He says, "Well, I went to school at Brookfield High." Really? I go to Brookfield High and I could buy a book, a yearbook. And why aren't you on there? So there's so many ways to find you. So it becomes a little more difficult for these guys. And one of the things that I did, even when I infiltrated the mob, I took it a step further with the help of the other agent, the case agent, because we know how distrustful they are. So, because they want to know everything about you, you had to grow up in the neighborhood. That I went and found a Mr. and Mrs. Jack Falcone that were buried together in a cemetery in Miami, Florida. So if we were down in Miami, which we were, and we were talking to these bad guys, and all of a sudden one may not trust me, or mine may even be a generous act and say, "You know what, you're from Miami, right?" It says, "Let's go pay our respects to your mother and father. I know they passed away. What are you going to do? Where are you going to go?"
Right.
You have to be ready for these things that happen that could be innocuous, but they could be really big that could backfire. So nowadays, I think what we in the FBI are doing is we rely, like the old days, more on the informants, on the cooperators, and maybe they'll bring in a guy for like cameos. Because the guys who are undercover for long term, they better have a very good backstop, or they have a good way to have put them where they're at, that they're not going to be compromised. Because nowadays they could find everything about us out there. It's in the internet.
You know, you just remind me of another story, talking about culture, talking about the little things. Do you remember Operation Sawbuck, my big money laundering case when we were together?
Yes.
Right? I remember we tried to get an office in the Diamond District, and our backstop people, our undercover coordinators, went in there undercover to get an office. And as soon as they wanted to get one, they introduced themselves. The manager threw them out, and said, "Sorry, officers, I can't help you." And why was that? Because they used Irish names, and he knew right away that if you're not Italian or Jewish, you're not setting up office in the Diamond District. Just these tiny little things that kind of gave us away. And I remember that it was kind of comical because luckily it wasn't all that dangerous, but it just shows
Well,
you.
see what I mean? That's exactly. Nowadays, you have to be, you have to make sure your identity fits. And that all depends too, is keeping in mind that undercover is an investigative technique, as is a wiretap, as is surveillance, as is a pen register. So you only utilize that if you really kind of tried every which way. But the lethal combination is what we did, is what we had an undercover operation and you combine it with a wiretap. Now you're talking about a really lethal operation. But again, when you deal with a lot of these sophisticated cartels, they use disposable phones. They're constantly changing it. You remember in our era, people were communicating via pagers, and they had all these symbols that we would get, like these numbers meant such and such a block, such and such a phone. So they're one step ahead of us, the bad guys, but we're able to adapt. The only thing that worries me about new undercovers is that I just hope that no one gets hurt down in the future because of the fact that there's so many ways to find out who people are. And, I just hope that they have all those backstops in place that are going to keep them from being in any type of danger.
We have a lot of young, smart kids coming in when you and I retired, really, cyber savvy. Let's go on some more questions. Who is all the heroin coming in from now? South of the border, Afghanistan. We've been out of it for a little while. Do you have a good take on that, Jack?
Yeah, the only thing I have is still, and so where the heroin's coming from, it's twofold. Who has the best price and the best quality? Afghanistan seems to be pretty much very large as far as they're bringing it in. But keep in mind, the Colombians who started in the 90s, it all depends on who they're selling to. Colombians are in the Hispanic community. Then you have the Mexican black tar, which is in LA. And then you have the Afghanistan, which is all in Chicago and all these other places. So I don't think if you're a heroin junkie, it really doesn't matter. The thing you have to worry about is the quality of it. Because the quality now has been so good and so pure, there's a lot of overdose. So that's why people now are inhaling heroin as well as smoking it with weed because of the fact that they're afraid that if all of a sudden you're used to 5 or 10% pure and you're buying heroin of the Colombians and that's 40, 50%, you could die. So the heroin, when we were working, as you know, prices like 5 years before that with the Italians was maybe 175,000 for a kilo. When we were working it with your case, the Montoyas, they were selling it for $58,000 for a kilo that was almost virtually pure. So, you know, a junkie doesn't care where it comes from, just as long as it comes from somewhere.
Exactly. Here's a question we kind of talked about. How often does an undercover get caught up in another undercover bust? I know you and I talked about we managed to catch a few before it happened, but in your experience, did it ever happen?
Yes, it happens basically more times than you could tell. Like I said, as every alphabet agency is working out there, we run into other guys working cases. They may have an informant who says, "Hey, I know a guy who is looking to buy dope or a guy who's selling dope," and all of a sudden we're out there on the set, and all of a sudden I get a phone call and says, "Hey, we just saw three cars that kind of look like our cars, you know, the typical FBI police car." And next thing you know, they're pulling the guy over, and yeah, we're working. Who you? We're supposed to meet a guy here. Well, and then we call the operation off. So there's always people stepping on each other's cases, especially when there's so many people in New York that work cases. I mean, you're talking about New York City Police Department has the narcotics squad. It has the Manhattan South. It has the DEA, the ATF, the INS, the IRS, and
I ran into the postal inspectors on one of my cases.
Postal inspectors, you see, I mean,
I'm like, how'd that
right.
happen? Right.
Well, that's why I think a good thing has happened, and I think it happened when you were an SAC, is now we have this partnership of guys. And I really believe that we were kind of the model of in C13, where we worked hand in hand with the NYPD. We had these detectives that were really great guys. We had amazing FBI agents. We even had an INS agent.
Yes, I remember him well. Yes.
Right. Remember Mush was his nickname. We had these guys and we collectively worked together. And I think that's what has happened. You're getting all of these guys there, and this way nobody steps on one another and nobody steals cases from one another.
All right, let's see. Someone asked, do you use a lot of NLP? I'm assuming that's neuro-linguistic programming techniques in undercover work. Was that ever part of your training, Jack?
I had never heard of NLPs.
Good. Okay, move on to the next one.
Is that like a dirty word or what? I don't know NLP.
Yeah, it's like those. I think you use the right words, you mirror people's.
Oh, the right word. Yeah. Well, I like that neuro-linguistic. Yes, you have to be able to fit in. You know, you can't go in with dope dealers talking like Thurston Howell III. You know, you can't sound sophisticated,
which, by the way,
erudite.
Most of the audience probably doesn't know who that is either.
Yeah, that's true too. But you know what? I learned that with my education and having worked undercover for so many years, I really sometimes it stuck with me now. Like the way I talk, sometimes my wife says to me, "Hey, you know, you're supposed to be a college graduate, you know, and you know, because in order to catch a criminal, you have to think like a criminal, you have to act like a criminal. So you can't go in there, you know, you wind up, it sticks to you, you know, and especially when I work the mob case or even the Colombian, every other word is F this and F that and your mother this and your mother that, you know. So you come home and that's part of your vernacular, you know.
You got to watch it, exactly. And this is probably more for your mob cases now, this next question. Is there a prove yourself moment like we see in the movies? Did you ever have that, especially in your mob cases?
You know, usually it's never really a prove yourself moment in any cases, whether it's Colombian cartels or Mexican cartels or drug dealers or mobsters. I really believe that all depends on the introduction. Like I said, you could do a cold case where you could go to the bar every day for 6 months or 8 months, and hopefully you're going to make a connection somehow, which you spend a lot of money and waste a lot of time with no guarantee, or the instant way, which is an informant introduction. Now, my motto has always been that if the informant is a high level informant, a guy who is well liked and respected by your target, then by virtue of his introduction of you, you're going to be liked and well respected. But if your informant is a piece of garbage, then you're a piece of garbage because you're hanging out with him. So as far as I think that a lot of that moment of being around these guys and them accepting you a moment, I think you prove yourself. You don't go right off the bat. You just kind of slowly and gradually. And that's what I did with Greg De Palma, who was the captain of the Gambinos. I hung out with him regularly. From then I gained his trust, and then I became his driver. I drove him around all day long. So these are positions you do slowly. You just don't go in and say, "Hey, I'm going to drive for you." You slowly work yourself in, and only time does that with informants.
Let's get answer the last couple of questions. We're running pretty late, but that's a good sign. All right. Someone asked, how do drug prices get set in the sense there's really no identifiable market? But I think there is a market. Isn't that how the prices get set?
Absolutely. There's always
Supply and
demand. As
demand.
you know, we've taken down a lot of dope, and then all of a sudden the price goes down. Or otherwise, they hold on to, I'm sorry, the price goes up after you take it. But sometimes they hold it back on purpose to affect the price. Keep in mind that a kilo to make in Colombia, it probably may be $1,000 or less. Okay. But there's so many layers in that whole world of drug dealers. There's your transporters, your warehouse guys, your delivery guy. Everybody gets a piece of the action, and it's so compartmentalized that if you take down a group here, they really can't give up the body in the back. So these prices are all depending on, what they decide to do and how they make the profit. As long as you have a market for drugs, you're going to have a drug problem. And I think the best thing ever done was when Nancy Reagan started the campaign of just say no to using drugs. And they laughed at her. But that's really the only way that we could stop. We take our young and we teach them to say no to using drugs because drugs they're out there. And as you know, we've seen things from, to now they use pharmaceuticals. I remember for a while it was ecstasy that was being hot. There's always some kind of new drug, but teaching our kids as they grow to say no may have an impact on that because it's such a money making venture, drug. So the prices that depends on the cartels. They set it, and as long as people need it, they'll have it.
Okay. Well, someone just making a point here, which you already addressed, how the internet makes it difficult for undercover operations. Last question for the evening, Jack. Do you see that there is a heroin epidemic or an opioid epidemic now? Do you see one or both happening in our country?
Since I'm away from it now, I rely pretty much only on what I read about it. It does sound, but even with the times we were there, the same thing was said about the cocaine epidemic and all of that. Luckily for me and all of us, we live in an area where we don't see too much of that. And I'm not in the front lines anymore, so I can't answer that. But what I'm noticing is that it seems that there is an issue, especially this opioid, where it seems that's kind of generated by doctors. I mean, I myself have gone to the doctors on several times, and they're very free in prescribing oxycodone and all that other stuff. So if that's being done, then of course that's the issue that it is. But I wish I could answer what's happening today, but what I read, it does look like there is an issue.
Jack, it's been an hour, and we didn't even scratch the surface of your amazing career. So,
Oh, Michael, it was my pleasure. I always enjoy talking with you. It was an honor working with you, and miss the old days. And that's what we miss, right? We miss being out there in the front lines. I mean, nowadays, I was telling someone the other day, I used to drive the captain of the Gambino crime family around. Then when I quit 11 years ago and I retired, I started driving my 6-year-old daughter around, and it was kind of like no difference. It was the same.
Around, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I do miss the action. I miss that adrenaline flow. I miss the camaraderie that we had, but hey, now it's for the young. Let them go out there, and I hope they're doing the same work that we did.
I'm sure they are. We paid our dues, and now they'll let them save the world.
Let them pay their dues. Correct.
Right. Hey, Jack, just we're going to put a picture of your book here. Just tell everybody a little bit about your book. And obviously, we found on Amazon, but tell us about that before you sign off.
Yeah, it's now in a paperback, which it's smaller. Yeah, I was very happy. I was able to write my stories. I listed some of my undercover cases there, and I highlighted the mob case. And I was fortunate that it did well, and now it's out now almost 10 years. So if you get a chance, read it. If not, hopefully Michael will have me back. I would love to come back.
Jack, we may do a follow-up on the mob, and I think you and maybe another one of our old colleagues coming on would be a great pair. So
that would be great.
We'll absolutely keep that in mind. Jack, you're always one of my favorite people in the FBI. You had a lot of fun.
Likewise, my brother. All the best.
Thank you so much. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
All right, buddy.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, folks, that was, we're very honored to have had Jack Garcia with us, really one of the most experienced undercover agents and successful undercover agents the FBI has ever seen. Before we go, though, I want to make a few points. And Max, let's get a picture of my book up there. Bad Intent, if you have it. No, not that one. Bad Intent. There we go. And the reason that it's a good time for me to show that book off is because that is a novel, but it's based on my years working with Jack when he was our undercover agent on the FBI NYPD Drug Task Force back in the 80s and 90s during the time the Colombian cartels, Medellin cartels, Pablo Escobar, cocaine was flooding the streets. So look for my book also. Anyway, folks, that was it for our show tonight in terms of Undercover. I'd like to take a few moments to talk about what's happened in the news lately. First, on behalf of my crew here, Max, Darren, myself, our sympathies and our hearts go out to the families of the victims and survivors of Las Vegas. And I want to address the issue of gun control because that comes up whenever we have one of these shootings, which unfortunately are happening all too often. I've long been a proponent of gun control, fair but reasonable gun control. And I want to just address some of the issues that come up, and I don't like when the argument gets diluted in other issues. First of all, we're not discussing a Second Amendment issue. Why is that? No one in the context of this debate is talking about taking guns out of people's homes. We are not discussing dictating to states how they should handle their open or concealed carry laws. Also, we must remember that in the landmark Heller case, the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia said that the government can control access to unusual and dangerous weapons. And that's what we're talking about, unusual and dangerous weapons. The other argument I hear often is, oh, why bother? Criminals will always get them. No, that's not true. Some criminals will. There's always a group of people who will break the law and get away with it. And why we realize that, the last time I checked, our jails are overcrowded with people who have legally obtained guns or drugs or other contraband. Having laws and enforcing them does reduce crime. It may not stop it and may never will, but we must reduce it and control it the best we can. So we have laws and we enforce them. And that's why we have laws. So the crime does not get out of control. What we're trying to do with these laws that will ban or prohibit, same thing, ban or at least make more difficult the ability to get these high-powered weapons or stockpile ammunitions or these magazines of vast capacity of rounds, we're trying to put stumbling blocks in the way of people getting their hands on them. And every time we do that, we slow them down. We're increasing the opportunity of stopping them from getting them beforehand. Will it work all the time? No. But will it work some of the times? Yes. As an analogy, excuse me, I'm not sure how that happened. As an analogy, I look at the terrorist case, or the terrorist cases that the FBI and the other agencies break up every now and then. And why is that? That's because the perpetrators didn't know how to get the elements to build a bomb, didn't have the expertise, didn't know how to do it. They reached out for help, and that's when we're able to interject an undercover agent and break this case up before anyone ever got hurt. It's the same theory. Tonight I was watching TV before our show when I saw some congressmen say, I don't want to deprive any gun owner of obtaining any gun that they ever want just because of one evil man. We all live with limitations on our rights. We all must comply with laws and rules that we don't like or we don't agree with. That is life in a civil society. We all make our sacrifices. In this country, we live by the rule of law, not man. I'm Michael Tabman. That's my take. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week. Please go to YouTube and become a subscriber. Please like us on Facebook, and we thank you for all your support as our audience continues to grow. See you next time.